Hello.
Howdy. So let's see, everybody. Let's start off with just a little context, and then we'll dive in. But this whole section that we've been in from 7 and this chapter is in the context of the Feast of Tabernacles, right? It's that fall major feast festival that has so many elements to it that, as David said, as Rabbi said last week, in some ways it's the biggest, most important festival. It celebrates Solomon and the temple. It celebrates the harvest coming in. The images are light, the Shekinah cloud of light that the escaped Jews from Egypt followed through the desert following Moses. It also celebrates the hope for the coming of Messiah, the great day of the Lord. And so it's full of expectations and ritual and images. And then especially the two major images that keep popping out for me is water and the Spirit. You know, the idea that in the age to come, that all people of God are longing for, Messiah brings in the new age, which is characterized by the overthrow of the oppressors, healing, the exorcism of the demonic, those forces that accuse and try to oppress God's people. And when the Spirit comes to bring in this new age, new water would flow. And so those are the images that will come up again and again. And I'm just trying to put them in the context of the Jewish framework, because this gospel is a very Jewish document written by Jews, for Jews, by Jews who had become Christians, and also Gentiles, but mostly in Asia Minor, modern day Turkey, on the coast near Ephesus. This is where this community gathered and gave rise to this gospel. Any questions or thoughts about that brief intro? All right, then let's see. Harold, do you mind reading chapter 8, verses 1 down to verse 11?
Oh, that starts while Jesus went to the Mount of Olives.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll start. Then each of them went home while Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They said this to test him so that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once again he bent down and wrote on the ground. When he heard it, they went away, one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus straightened up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, sir." And Jesus said, Neither do I condemn you. Go your way, and from now on, do not sin again.
What you got to say about that, Harold? Anything?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is that song from the movie Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, I think it is, where Marilyn Monroe sings "Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend." There's a line in that song that says, "When you get old and you can't straighten up when you bend." So Jesus must have not been very old, because he was certainly able to straighten up after bending. Which is something I find hard to do these days myself. So the only thing I have to say with regard to this is, I have read somewhere that, I think it was in is it the Jesus Seminar? I don't know if that's
Yeah.
what it's called, where people who got together to try to decide which things in the Gospels did Jesus really say, versus is it something that could have been made up by a writer. And this is the one thing I've read that, I'm not saying, this is not my opinion, but I mean, I have no opinion about it, but this is the one thing that many scholars of the New Testament agree Jesus really did say. And I don't know, maybe it's because, does the story appear in all four of the Gospels?
No, Harold, that's a good thought. In all of the earliest, best manuscripts, and in the early church fathers who reflected on Scripture, this is missing, right? So in most manuscripts, this is in brackets, because I think it was not until the 5th or 6th century that it became included in the Gospel of John, but it doesn't really show up until there. So yes, I think with good evidence, this was not part of the original text. However, it seems to communicate something of the character of Jesus's
Yeah.
life and behavior. So, anybody else?
I I am under the impression, Steve, that the New Testament was canonized in the year 390. Is that not correct?
Yeah, later, once Christianity had become the religion of the empire, if you will, then that's when they had the power and authority to call these councils together of bishops all over the known world to then come to agreement on
So,
things like what is authoritative scripture or not.
so when you're saying this was added to the gospel, are you saying this was added after the gospels were canonized?
Yes, that's what.
Huh.
Yeah, so that's why it's always in brackets. You know, it's instructive. I think it's a beautiful story, but technically, it wasn't a part of that original canonized gospel.
Okay.
Now, anybody have a problem with that? Because, as you know, these stories were just passed orally, and then scraps were written on little pieces of papyri or however they did it. And then editors began to pull it together. And so, what we have here in this gospel is a 5-phase process that led to around, let's say, 95 Common Era, which is 65 years post Jesus, right? And so these manuscripts, as they were put together, some included texts that are not in others, but as they kept pulling it together, the text, the scriptures that had most agreement or had the ring of authority or were earliest were the ones that were cobbled together to give us this final phase as we have it now from 95. Harold?
Oh, no, Mea culpa. I just remember that this is not the story I remember hearing about that could have been the one thing that Jesus really said. I was confusing it with the story where Jesus says, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. I think I read somewhere that scholars agree that that is something that probably Jesus really said. So I was confusing it with this one.
Yeah.
I also think this dovetails with Jesus saying that when you point out the splinter in the other person's eye, don't forget about the log that's in yours, or something like that. So
The mote in someone's eye.
Pardon, the what?
The mote, M-O-T-E.
Oh,
Yeah, but it's a translation, right? It's that little thing in your eye when you see it in others, a little thing, but look, you're seeing through a big log in your own eye.
yeah. So I think that's consistent with you're pointing out the sins of others and forgetting about your own. So that's consistent with this story here.
Now, again, it raises the question of the resistance to Jesus as he violates the customs, the laws, the traditions that many hold authoritative. And so on what basis, what grounds, what authority are you given to do that, we might say. But if anyone has anything else to say about this, let's hear it. And then I want to go to Troy's question in the chat, and then we'll move on to pick up where we left off last week in the in his that, which would be chapter 12. Troy, did you have another question as well about this?
Well, it sort of is separate, but aligns with it, you know, and I have no idea the answer, henceforth asking. I think it's a beautiful story of forgiveness. However, you know, as I've grown and studied, at least I hope I've grown, you know, it begs the question of if someone was caught, such as this woman was, would the actions that are sort of described in this story of the Jewish leaders, would they have handled it that way? I think Jesus's response is beautiful from a Christian standpoint of forgiveness, et cetera, et cetera. But I just wonder, would the Jewish leaders have handled it that way? Because it's just the woman. Also, it's, you know, there's nobody else with her. So it just makes me wonder, would they have handled it that way, albeit a beautiful story from a forgiveness standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, good question. It's a thoughtful question. I just don't know. My you know, what is it? Leviticus 20 verse 10 is where that, you know, that commandment comes from most directly. But yeah, there's cases of folks who were stoned in the New Testament. Stephen was stoned so it was a remedy for silencing voices that were considered to be toxic or off base. And so, but on the other hand, you got to think there's a lot of reasonable folks who get together like we would and say, well, this context is, you know, and because nobody likes to, I mean, I can't imagine throwing a stone at someone's face, you know. Let's see, Don, I think you had a thought.
Yeah, I think, you know, this another match to the fire of people resenting Jesus, and also seeing the multitude of positions that the audience may have had in connection with this topic. You know, the elephant in the room is that she committed adultery.
Right.
And there was a bunch of reactions against the way Jesus handled the situation, which seems to be a common thread in the Gospel of John. That's all.
Yeah, good.
To be fair, though, it must be agreed that not everybody followed all the laws of the time as we don't today. I mean, the eye for an eye was not truly being followed. I mean, otherwise everybody we would have one eye or would be blind. It just we have as a human beings we selectively follow laws that we should, and sometimes we just don't.
Um, Stephen, I think there's another story that's in the apocryphal collection of books, the story of Susanna, the rape of Susanna. Um, and it's a short book, but I don't know, it's in contrast to saving the woman in a situation that was made up in front of the authorities. And I know that was written much later than the period we're talking about, but it's just interesting that the base was covered, so to speak, in the book of Susanna.
Yeah, that's great. I haven't read that in a long time. I think you've nudged me to go look at it. But also do note that someone raised the question of what about the guy? What about the male who was in this?
Yeah.
Don't know, right? We do know that women, by and large, had a lot less, cushion for error. That there was a lot more constraints on women. Okay, yeah, Harold, please.
Just another thought. I just recall, I mean, it's too bad that Rabbi David isn't here because I'm sure he would be able to pull out probably at least half a dozen references. But the issue that Troy brought up about forgiveness, I think about the story of Joseph, where in the end of that story, Joseph forgives his brothers for having sold him into slavery. There's a reconciliation between him and his brothers. And that behavior could be seen as a role model. I can't point to a specific passage in the Bible that says, forgive this, forgive that, or anything like that. But in terms of a role model for that behavior, that forgiveness rather than vengeance is what Joseph did in the Torah. And there may be other examples, I don't know.
Many other examples, Harold, and I'm glad you brought that up because we're gonna get into that very question about belief and behavior and forgiveness and sin in just a second. But let's keep Joseph because he was an example. As Jesus himself has said up to now, look, if you follow Moses, if you know Moses, you won't be as you won't push back so hard. What I say will ring true because what I'm saying is given to me to say from Abraham, from Moses, from the Father, from Isaiah. So I do think there's this idea of those who recognize me in that setting, in that context. I'm not talking about 20 years later, right? Let's just hold that. For those who had the openness, the sensitivity, the heart to recognize this nonviolent approach as consistent with the God they know. Yes, there's the other part of that, the accountability, and we'll get to that too. But I think your question is really, really key as we move ahead. Troy, before we do, could you ask your question to the group that you chatted?
Yes, sir. The question was, do we feel like the gospel, this particular gospel, aligns with the Hebrew scriptures, or is it, disconnected, with only allusions, reaching back? There's definitely topics that certainly are there, but does it truly align with it, or is this true, or is this really something new? Is it something that's reaching beyond what the Hebrew scriptures are saying?
Man, that's great. Love that. Well, and we've talked, Troy, in the last few weeks about, is Jesus a reformer in the prophetic tradition? Is he much like the prophets, calling Israel back to its covenant, like Moses 2.0? Or is there something singular about him and his identity? Who is he? That's what they keep asking. Who are you? What's your deal? And so some on one side who really focus on the Gospel of John as revealing the incarnation of God in Jesus of Nazareth as Messiah, but that he is identified with God and therefore supersedes the Hebrew scriptures. So does this supersede, or does the thread continue and deepen? Right? Is that correct, Troy? Do I understand your question?
Yeah. I think, and correct me if I'm misinterpreting. I think that's sort of the story we get from Paul. Paul, if we accept that he is who the church teaches he is, a Pharisee and very knowledgeable of the Hebrew scriptures. He didn't convert because of the Hebrew scriptures. He converted because of a miracle, outside of the Hebrew scriptures, which he details, I believe, in Corinthians. But yes, so I think, if I'm understanding you right, this is something that is, an additional step than we would get just from the Hebrew scriptures alone. And am I saying that right?
Yeah, you are. I mean, I get it. I think this is probably the real elephant in the room, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, especially for this group, I would argue, though, Troy, that when Paul in Romans, for example, talks about, I bear my people witness, they have zeal for God, but not in accordance with knowledge. And when he says things like, you Gentiles are lucky, you're getting grafted like a wild shoot onto the vine of the covenant people. You are here by grace, so don't get arrogant about your position. He says things like Jesus is the telos of the law. And some say, I see telos as the fulfillment, as not the end, as in it's now cut off and now it's all new, but as in fulfillment. As Jesus says in Matthew over and over again, look, I haven't come to take away a jot or tittle from the law. I'm here to fulfill it. And then finally, David showed us last week, Matthew 25, where, which I thought was perfect, because Jesus says to the greatest of you are those who have visited me in prison. You've ministered to me when I'm sick. You've taken care of me. And they say, when did we do that? And they say, and he says, whenever you've done it to the least of these, you've done it to me. So there is a moral faculty within the human being, I think is the biblical view, Hebrew and Christian, that is centered in the heart. And the heart, as Paul said, there's an eye in the heart, the eye of the heart. And so when people like these religious leaders in the Gospel of John, the Jews, which he's not using to generalize at all. That's why this is such a Jewish document. The inner rivalries between sects within Judaism were always in a sort of conflict. And so when the biblical wisdom tradition says the heart is the center, if the eye of the heart is closed, then we can only see with our physical vision, not with the eye of faith, right? That I think is a consistent understanding. When the eye is closed, the heart hardens. And then all we're left with is our bullshit, whether it's good enough, our education, or or whatever. So I'm saying that Matthew 25 text says, those of you who have humble hearts are open. It doesn't matter what you believe in as a concept. It's this perception of the other as beloved, as beautiful. And so I think John's gospel gives us stories and evidences of those who faith with both eyes, the eyes of the vision of our physical and the eye of the heart. I call that binary vision. But those whose hearts are hardened, they can only see the literal surface of things. So I think that I'll point that out as we get into the text. But, you know, it's not an answer, Troy, but it's just my way of trying to wrestle with this stuff. Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody?
Thank you. Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you very much. The passage from Matthew is so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. But I appreciate your input and your guidance so much. So thank you, sir.
And again, Troy, I would just to add, Paul's beef was not with the Jews. It was with the Jews who believed in Jesus as Messiah, but nonetheless insisted on circumcision from Genesis, Genesis 15, Genesis 17, where circumcision was given to Moses. These folks were the folks who Paul was, who said, look, Paul, great, Jesus is cool, love him, but you've also got to become Jewish. You got to get circumcised. And that undermined Paul's message wherever he went, those who insisted on Jesus, but also circumcision. That was the group that that Paul was struggling with mostly.
But you have to admit that group included Peter and James. I mean, they were the ones that were insisting on the circumcision. The brother of Jesus and his most well-known disciple.
In Galatia, you mean when they?
That's right.
Yeah, but also, remember Peter's conversion when he goes to see Cornelius, the Roman centurion, in the book of Acts, where he's given that vision, and it's all the things that are forbidden to eat, and then he hears the voice of God say, "Eat." He goes, "No way! I'm a purist. I'm a good Jew." And then finally, the message is, I don't consider anything unclean, except in the heart. And so go and eat with this Roman enemy, Cornelius, and have dinner with him. And that scandalized all the early Christians, like James in Jerusalem. They were horrified that Peter just kind of laid aside his tradition with that moment. So, yeah, I think it's complicated. It's complicated. Don.
Yeah.
But thanks for the pushback, Ajit, because there's two sides to all this, right? Don.
I just wanted to take a shot at Troy's question. Do I feel that the gospel aligns well with the Hebrew scriptures? I would say no. It is somewhat connected with only references. And I bring to mind the healing at the pool of water. And there were a couple of others that the healing on a Sabbath. Those were, in a sense, thought of as violations of the Hebrew traditions. So the only way, I think the Gospel of John has a lot of anti-Semitism in it that kind of goes away with Paul. Paul kind of moves back into that tradition of Moses and his, at least, thought process. So I think from the first 8 chapters that we've read in the Gospel of John, although it is Christian and although it is more ethical, it does not align with Hebrew traditions because of the things that Jesus did that were against the Hebrew traditions. That's just my thought.
Thanks so much. I love that pushback. I'm just saying that John is not anti-Semitic in my take, in my reading, because I think this is an inner Jewish conversation. And as Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, you have heard that it was said, but I say to you. So, in that sense, yes, there's a reformation, there's a deepening, there's what I would call an effort to get to the faithing heart and not just our rational, will, if you will.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I love this gospel. There's no two ways about it. And I think the many signs that it offers to us give us something to encase our faith in, our Christian faith in. But I can see little wrinkles and him rankling a lot of the Jewish people. I mean, this took place at the temple. So who were those people at the temple? Were they devout Jews? They must have been some kind of a religious person, because they were occupying the temple at the time he was speaking.
yeah. And keep in mind, the temple has been destroyed 30 years, 25 years earlier. So the Gospel of John knows that the temple's gone. So it begins to try, even as the Jewish Pharisees in rabbinic Judaism were trying to pull it together. Okay, the temple's gone. Now, what makes
Yeah.
us Jewish? Where do we go from here? And you are absolutely right, however, that the Gospel of John is seen as the most anti-Semitic text. I'm just arguing against that. My take,
Okay.
when you interpret it, but in the way that I'm trying to, that
But
it's
Steve, who is it anti-Semitic for? Is it anti-Semitic for the Jews or anti-Semitic for the Christians? I don't think Christians believe it as an anti-Semitic document. I think the awareness of the Hebrew tradition sees in the gospel things that it may consider anti-Semitic. That's all I'm saying.
no, and it's fair point. I'm just saying that I know a lot of Christians who really chafe at those perceived anti-Semitic statements. But again, and I've tried to say this in the past few weeks, after the temple was destroyed, the Jewish Christian movement had gained so much energy and was creating such a scandal and a challenge to establishment Judaism, which is disestablished with the temple being gone, as they try to reconnect and fight against these Jewish Christians like Paul, who say that you don't have to be circumcised, you don't have to follow some of the dietary regulations, whatever. And those were the folks who cursed the Christians who were Jewish, who came to synagogue, because they had to recite these oaths. And one of the oaths was cursing Christians, right? So that was the Jewish way of maintaining their community and its purity over and against the pagans and the Jewish Christians who were softening on the law. And so I think the enemy in this gospel are those Jews who have power in leadership positions, who are going after. And keep in mind, Christianity is not the world religion at this point. It's being persecuted. It's still barely emerging. And so the Jews still have all the power, and they have sought to squelch the Christian voice. And so John in this gospel is trying to give voice to the other Jews, because they're all Jews in that temple, like you just pointed out. And so he's not throwing everybody under the bus. He's throwing under the bus those who have the power to kill others if they don't comply.
Can I ask this question? We're talking about it here around the year 90, I would say, 85, 90. The temple has been destroyed. The Jews have been dispersed from Jerusalem, and you're still saying, and this has been done by the Romans. But you're still saying that these Jews have the power. What power do they have when the temple has been destroyed and they have all been thrown out of Jerusalem? I would say the Jews were powerless at this point.
Well, they're all gathering on the Mediterranean coast at Yamnia, right? That's where they began to solidify, and then the Jewish writings come out, in the
Talmudic writings, which
Yeah,
took about 200 years to even start being compiled and collected.
right. So the power is the power of thought, the religious power that they
Okay.
have over, part of the community of John.
They're
I don't mean that
unpassionate.
they have worldly power, Ajit, but they do have the power to uh, uh, what John and Paul would say, to diminish the impact of the gospel covenant.
Yeah, it's their passion of faith. That's their power, the passion of their faith as a group.
Totally. Good. Anything else?
Yeah.
Harold.
Just wanted to say, make a remark about today. We've been talking about how this was a sort of intra-Jewish squabble, or, between different schools of thought as to how to interpret the law of Moses, et cetera, et cetera. And this goes on today very much. Many Orthodox Jews today, and certainly many ultra-Orthodox Jews, do not look upon Reform Judaism, which is what is practiced by the vast majority of American Jews, and they don't regard it as real Judaism. I had a cousin in Israel who told me one time, referring to the Judaism practiced in the US, he said, it's not really Judaism. It's not real Judaism. So there's certainly intra-Jewish squabbles going on that continue today.
I know.
And much of the history of Judaism has to do with intra-Jewish disagreement. They say two Jews, three opinions. It's been going on for a long time. And when you were talking about Peter saying something, you had this image of Peter with all of these different foods that, and he says, oh, I'm not going to eat that, I'm not going to eat that, et cetera, et cetera. And I recall in the 1800s, I believe somewhere in the late 1800s, when Reform Judaism started developing in Germany and also in the United States, there was a big dinner given by newly Reformed Jews in the United States, somewhere, I don't know where it was, Cleveland, New York, Cincinnati, or something like that. And if you look at the menu, it included shrimp on the menu, so about as non-kosher as you can get. So this type of thing is continuing to this day, and it really drives home for me the root meaning of the name or the word Israel, which means struggle with God. And it is a struggle. It's a struggle for better understanding. It's a struggle for interpreting, for analyzing, for reanalyzing, for reinterpreting. And it just goes on, just keeps going on and on. And I think that's one of the central I see that as one of the central characteristics of Judaism. It's certainly a movement in evolution, definitely.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Well said.
Although I will say to you, Harold, the scariest people are those that accept something and insist they're correct and refuse to talk about it. Those are the ones that become fanatics. I
Sure.
mean, those are scary people. So
Yeah.
And fanatics usually kill others in the name of their guiding principle, or in the name of God as they understand God.
I know.
And so in a very short time, Christianity, once it becomes the religion of empire, then John could be used against them as the Jews, you bishops or you whatever, because it's the same game, different name. This is a dynamic that we're exploring here in the Gospel of John. But and I know there's some good fundamentals. I like that word, fundamentals. But when it becomes fundamentalism, then it's violent. It leads to sacred violence, where you now kill Christians who don't believe the doctrine that you're supposed to believe in God, in Christ's name. Now it's in Christ's name.
Or 9/11,
This
or
dynamic is what I think this gospel is trying to open up.
yeah.
Troy, any further musing in light of the conversation you started?
Yeah, I want to first apologize if I held us up. I appreciate everyone's guidance, but I really didn't mean to take away from the progress. But I so appreciate the help. But while I'm sure we could go on and on and on, I'll try to keep them to myself for right now.
Please don't. This is how we roll. Okay, well let's see. David will get mad at me if we don't do some of this.
Oh,
I'm kidding. All right, let's see. Megan, do you mind, or could you read the beginning of scene 3 of this section of the Festival of Booths that we've been in? So we've done section 1, section 2. This is the third and last section, verse 12.
Verse 12.
And read
Again-
all the way down, please, to verse 20.
Yes. Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Then the Pharisees said to him, you are testifying on your own behalf. Your testimony is not valid. Jesus answered, even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid because I know where I have come from and where I am going, but you do not know where I come from or where I am going. You judge by human standards. I judge no one. Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is valid, for it is not I alone who judge, but I and the Father who sent me. In your law it is written that the testimony of 2 witnesses is valid. I testify on my own behalf, and the Father who sent me testifies on my behalf. Then they said to him, where is your Father? Jesus answered, you know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. He spoke these words while he was teaching in the treasury of the temple, but no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. More?
Great. No, let's stop there and just see if there's any comments or questions. This bit about testimony, right? That's a legal question. And these folks, the Pharisees, it says, are just challenging his authority. What do you mean? It sounds dangerous what you're saying, but let me make sure I get it.
Yeah.
But they say that to test him always, right? They're always trying to find, they don't care about what his truth is. At the end of the day, they're looking for evidence to support their foregone conclusion.
Well, here's a question, though. He's always
Wait.
obtuse. I think Jesus is obtuse a lot, of course. But it begs the question, why didn't he give him more information? And why leave it out there where they can accuse him and plot against him even more? Just say a couple more things to get him off his back. Get them off his back. It's a mystery to me, and I guess everybody else, but I know he talks in parables and everything else, but why be so obtuse?
Wayne, that's a perfect question. Does anybody have an answer to that?
I think you were talking about vision, sight, and I think there are two things in play here. One is sight, the other is insight.
Good.
And I think he's appealing to their insight to be able to recognize his station, recognize him. Physically, he looks like another man, arms and legs and walking around, etc. But he's saying to recognize me, you need to have the inner vision, the inner sight.
Ajit,
And
that's
if
well
you don't
said.
have it, you won't know me.
Yeah, well said. I mean, yeah, I don't know that I have anything to add to that other than that. And he does this when he was asked in the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, why do you speak in parables? And he says, because, and then he quotes Isaiah, hearing, they don't hear, seeing, they don't see. That's what Isaiah said to his people, who Isaiah is trying to use insight of the divine word to open up the hearts of his people, but they don't get it. And that's why the prophets keep getting killed, and hearing, they just don't hear.
But
Seeing, hear, they don't see with the heart.
Isn't
And
there
so it doesn't matter what I say. I can say anything. I can come down off the cross and do a tap dance, and they still won't believe me. Why? Because their minds are made up.
But isn't there some burden on the Pharisees? They're lawyers. I practiced law for a long time. And if someone's going to talk like he does, wasn't somewhat incumbent on the Pharisees to say, look, to ask questions, it's testimony. So let's look at it from a legal standpoint. If there's testimony, then the other side needs to say, well, what the hell are you talking about? Or why don't you speak more plainly? Or let me ask you a few questions about what you just said. So I think the Pharisees failed to live up to supposedly what they're supposed to do is to question and find out, just not to say, this guy's crazy, he's violating everything we have. Let's go ahead and put a little pressure on him to explain himself.
Steve, I'm very confused by verse 20. I don't understand what that says at all.
Thanks for that, Wayne. Let's see, verse 20, he spoke these words while he was teaching in the treasury of the temple, but no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come.
And he's saying you would know my Father. And I don't understand that verse. What does that mean?
It's kind of like a koan, right? Like a Zen Buddhist statement that kind of messes with you. It gets you to go deeper to insight, perhaps. But I don't know if I have an answer other than in John's gospel over and over again, like when at the wedding at Cana in chapter 2, I believe, when we read it, Mary is saying, we need more wine. And he says, my hour is not yet come. So the hour comes when he's finally arrested and then accused of blasphemy and then crucified. So, Ajit, I don't know what to say about that.
Okay.
Are you talking about 19? You know neither me nor my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also.
Yeah.
That's what you were talking about.
Yeah. And
Oh,
going forward.
Oh, I thought you said verse 20.
Yeah, 1920.
Yeah, so I think as we'll soon see in chapter 13 to 17, he's saying, I do nothing alone. Everything I do is as the visible part of an invisible connection with the Father. So if what I say offends you or scandalizes you, then you don't really understand the Father's approach or way of thinking. You think like a human thinks, not as God thinks. I don't know. I mean, I think that's all in there, but it's complicated and mysterious, I would also add. Let's see how we doing for time. Let's do 5 more minutes, and then if we could break in 5 minutes, that'll help me get to the dentist to replace a filling that I lost.
Right, okay.
Because I'm in Fredericksburg now and I have to drive to Austin, and it's about an hour and a half, and that's when my appointment is. At any rate, let's go to the next section, which would be 21 to 30. Ajit, since you've got the floor, keep talking, keep
Okay.
reading.
Again, he said to them, I am going away, and you will search for me, but you will die in your sin. Where I am going, you cannot come. Then the Jews said, is he going to kill himself? Is that what he means by saying, where I am going, you cannot come? He said to them, you are from below, I am from above. You are from this world, I am not from this world. I told you that when you die in your sins, for you will die in your sins, unless you believe that I am he. They said to him, who are you? Jesus said to them, why do I speak to you at all? I have so much to say about you and much to condemn, but the one who sent me is true, and I declare to the world that I have heard from him. They do not understand that he was speaking to them about the Father. So Jesus said, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will realize that I am he, and that I do nothing on my own, but I speak these things as the Father instructed me. And the one who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, for I always do what is pleasing to him. As he was saying these things, many believed in him.
Okay. Manuel, Sue, do y'all have any thoughts? Haven't heard your voice today yet.
No, you haven't. It's very, very confusing what he says.
It's like two ships passing in the night.
Yeah, it's very, very confusing.
I mean, he's talking on one level and they're hearing on
Right.
another level.
Right. Yeah, it's a different plane.
But I don't understand why many believed in him. If what we're saying is true about two ships passing in the night, how does many come to believe in him?
Well, we'll soon learn in the next section that those many who believed in him end up trying to kill him. So it's a short-term belief.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I think there's some who might have started their insight might have started to leak out, and maybe they got some aha light bulbs. I don't know what to make of it, because it's quizzical language. It's like, remember Nicodemus in that early chapter we looked at, where Nicodemus, I would submit, the eye of his heart is closed, but it's kind of, it's opening a little bit, and he's curious. And so he comes by night so that he won't be seen by his peers talking to this guy who's perceived as kind of off the rocker, or at least, a lawbreaker. And so Jesus says, you must be born from above. And I think this is not Manichaean dualism, even though the language of light and darkness, much like in the Qumran Essenes, or even the Persians talk, where there's all good, all evil, and you're on one side or the other. I think rather that to Nicodemus, he was saying, unless and until you can see with the heart, that's what it means to be born from above, because most of us are walking along the horizontal plane that is determined by the great chain of being. And we are links on that chain, determined by our place on that determined line. And I think in a way he's saying, until that vertical intersects your horizontal, which is the above, that you won't get it. You won't see it. Like those holograms. I've seen posters that just look like gibberish colors, but when I relax my eye and just stare, every now and then something 3D will pop in.
But I feel that this is very antagonistic.
It is. It
Yeah.
is indeed.
Yeah.
It is indeed. Yeah. Thank you. It is antagonistic.
Yeah.
He's provoking.
Yes.
Yeah. Stephen,
Yes, sir.
I'll kind of echo that, I think, a little bit, because although in the very first part where we had the story of the adulterous woman, and it was very beautiful, it was a wonderful story, as Troy pointed out, it was, and where Jesus says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, et cetera, don't be judgmental. In these last two sections that we've read are awful, I think. I mean, where Jesus says, for example, I have much to say about you and much to condemn. Well, so all of a sudden, here he is condemning. Now, I'm not a Christian, so I don't believe that Jesus was without sin. We just don't hear about it. And there's every time Jesus appears in the Gospels, which he does all the time, he's always doing miracles and goodness and light and wonderful. And here he is talking about, basically, I am the light of the world. Basically, what he said, to me, it sounds like he's saying, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I'm the savior of the world, and salvation is only through me. And, you know, and it's me. And it's telling, where the Pharisees say, where is your father? You know neither me nor my father. He always refers to him as my father, not yours, not yours.
He doubles down here in the next section. Their father's the father of lies, the evil
like
father.
these passages. As much as I love the first part, I don't like these at all. This is just my personal gut reaction to this.
Harold, can we just let that simmer on our plate and then next week pick it up? Because I love ending with that, because there is dissonance and there's a lot to it begs so many questions, and I hope we'll have time to pick that up. Because what is that? Is that a mean spirit? Is that an instance of when Isaiah said, it doesn't, you're testing me, it doesn't matter what I do, it's always going to be judged wrong. And I think he gets that feeling from them that you guys are condemning me and you're going to kill me. And so he's pushing back, not against the Jewish people, but the Jews. In this case, the bishops and the priests.
But if you were to take that 753 out, that whole section, chapter 7, verse 53, about the woman caught in adultery, you would get a different tone to that chapter.
To this chapter?
The 8th chapter, if you took out that section that you said was not in the manuscript.
That's right. And if we just started with verse 12.
Yeah, you would get a totally different flavor for that chapter.
Agreed. All right, guys, I've got to run. Oh, but Wayne, did you have a parting thought? Okay. All right. See you next week. Oh, no. Next week is Rosh Hashanah, right? Yeah.
Right.
So we'll see you in whenever David sent out that message to us, but we're going to miss 2 weeks, I believe.
Okay.
Anyway, check
Thank
the
you,
email.
Steve.
All right. Bye-bye.